Good morning. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors for Tuesday, September 18th, 2012. Chairman Modi is representing Shasta County and our forest issues at a meeting in Denver today. Today is the 65th anniversary of the United States Air Force. So we have Pastor Dave Honey to lead us in an invocation, and following that, Chief Master Sergeant Bob Dunlap, U.S. Air Force retired, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Well, good morning, and thank you again, ladies and gentlemen of the board, for the privilege of being here again today. And as I don't normally prepare prayer, we'll see how the Lord leads us to what this invocation will bring to you this morning. So let's just bow our hearts. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you praising you and thanking you for all that you do. We thank you, Lord, for the incredible leadership of this very progressive county and the very heavy decisions that are sometimes laid upon them to lead us and to really create a greater area, a greater county for us to live in and to prosper in. So we lift up this meeting to you today and ask, Lord, that everything that is said and done will be directed by you and will certainly benefit our county and all who reside in it, but most of all to glorify you. So again, we thank you for this beautiful day. We thank you for this beautiful area that you've given us to live, and we just lift all of these things up to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.
And just because we're 65 years old doesn't mean we're all retirement eligible in Air Force. If you would please follow me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pastor Honey. And Bob, where's our song?
They cleared the place.
Thank you both. Right. The next item on our agenda is public comment period. I have two speaker request forms. Kathy Grindstaff, followed by Jim Berg.
Good morning, supervisors, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kathy Grindstaff. I am the project director for a Sobering Choice Coalition. I'm here representing our coalition and members of the community. After last week's meeting, you made me think. You asked, what is the outcome we want from speaking to you about the issues with marijuana grows and cultivation in Shasta County? Well, I want to ask you, if you lived across the street from a grow, something you had to look at every day, if you had to deal with the increase in traffic on your street, with vehicles from out of state at all hours, if you wanted to open your windows to take advantage of the beautiful evening air and all you smelt was skunk, what would you want to do about that? If this is the second year you've had to deal with these issues, what would you want? And especially, how fast would you want these issues dealt with? Shasta County developed ordinances that did deal with these issues, and we commend you on the work involved to adopt the ordinances. Now we just ask you to think of a way we can now enforce these very ordinances. With the budget stretched to the max, we know we need to work to come up with a solution to finding funds to help the Sheriff's Office and Planning Department to deal with the increased complaints. We are not only asking for this issue to become an agenda item, but to actually be part of the solution. We want to work with you in helping find a way to deal with the ongoing cultivation problems in Shasta County. We want to work with you to find funds to help the Sheriff and Planning Department deal with our calls and complaints and act on them. If it was you and your children or your grandchildren looking across the street or even next door and seeing the plants, experience the smell, the traffic, the odor, you would do anything in your power to work to change this problem. The sooner we work together to deal with this situation, the sooner we can come up with a solution that works for all of us. We are here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grindstaff. Jim Berg, followed by Dolores Lucero.
Madam Vice Chair, members of the board and county staff, my name is Jim Berg, and good morning. I have the honor and privilege of being the chapter commander of the Military Order of Purple Heart, and on Thursday, the 20th, marks the first anniversary of the board's proclaiming that Shasta County become the first county in the nation to be designated a Purple Heart County. So I'm here to thank the board, and the pins represent the county. And because of that leadership in the county, being the first county in the nation, our state leadership started to develop, getting the state becoming the first state in the nation. And they were able to do that in April of this year, just ahead of Ohio, who did it like less than 30 days later. And so the state had the coins made up, designating California as the first Purple Heart state in the nation. So it's kind of a 1-1 thing for our state, but it was really based on this county proclaiming the county being the first. That motivated the state to do it, kind of think outside the box. And so everyone now is following our lead. We have 15 other counties in the nation who are declared Purple Heart counties, and 3 states, Kentucky, Ohio, and us, and something like 36, 37 cities. And because of this action of the county, I have been appointed part of the national leadership team that coordinates cities, counties, and states from now on, and I frequently use the proclamation that you guys did as an example for them. And they just take that and it kind of helps them develop their own proclamation, but it's the standard bearer of proclamations for the nation. So on behalf of all veterans in the county, and particularly the Military Order of the Purple Heart, I thank you very much.
Supervisor Kehoe?
Mr. Berg,
Yes, sir.
thank you for those kind words. However, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge publicly your leadership in this arena. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, and truly it was the leadership of Linda Hartman and CEO Larry Lees who initially put their arms around this thing and made it happen. So a lot of the credit goes to this board and Linda and Larry, and I thank them both.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. Dolores Lucero?
Good morning. My name is Dolores Lucero, the ex-councilwoman of the city of Shasta Lake. I'm here to basically go over a couple of things in regarding Mrs. Sherry Beck. I know she's running for the Board of Supervisor here, but for her to be throwing your, Modi, Linda, I think Mr. Hawk, throwing that weight around like, she should be elected just because she has your endorsement. I think she would not be the solution. She would be the problem.
Ms. Lucero, please address the board on issues that pertain to the board.
Yeah, but under public comment, I think I'm able to say any issues regarding.
Well, you can, but we'd certainly like to hear about issues regarding Shasta County, not election campaign issues.
I'm actually getting to that, We have a lot of problems in the county, and having Sherry Beck will not solve any of those problems. So I'm just saying that we have some issues regarding in the county, like, we're wasting taxpayers' money. We got the issues regarding the medical marijuana. I mean, we got a lot of issues. We need someone that's going to stand up and fight for the people. And so far, I have not seen that, because so far, I feel like the Board of Supervisors have that position to represent the people, and the people still have to come here and try to fight what they believe that you're not doing your job. And I do believe that we need a change, but having Mrs. Sherry Beck is not going to change anything. So just bringing that to the people's attention. Thank you.
I have no other speaker request forms at this time. Is there anyone that would like to address the board? Seeing none, we will move on to our regular calendar. Item R1, a presentation. Receive an update from Shasta Trinity National Forest Supervisor Sharon Haywood regarding the recent fires.
You can do that if you just hit that button right there when you're ready.
Okay.
That arrow.
Thanks. Good morning, Vice Chair, Members of the board, my name is Sharon Haywood. I'm the Forest Supervisor of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. I'd like to give you a brief overview of the recent fires. We've had many in our communities, and we understand many of our communities have been impacted, and I will focus, I'll give you an overview of the forest, but I'll focus on Shasta County. So of the fires that we have had that we call notable fires this year, you will see their general location, and then I'm going to focus on the 3 of them that are in red that are in Shasta County. The Ward, the Salt Creek, and the Bagley, and I'll primarily focus on the Bagley because it is the largest by far. Salt Creek is 100% contained. It had an impact on traffic, obviously, with closing I-5. It threatened several hundred structures, and it was active for the first few days in August. Just under 1,000 acres, 800 acres public, and not quite 200 of them private. I thought I would give you a sense of the peak of the number of people or assigned to the fires. That does not mean that that's the total number of people. For example, we might have a crew come, and the crew stays for 7 days because they're timing out. They really generally work 14 days, and so then another crew would come and replace them. So we've literally had thousands of people come and fight these fires. The Bagley fire is 100% contained. This was lightning caused, and it was 2 fires initially that burned together. We put 17 jumpers on them. This is in Supervisor Hawes' district. Very, very rugged country. It threatened some homes, certainly the power lines to the east of the fire, recreational areas, etc. It was active for just about 30 days and covered more than 46,000 acres, and we had almost 2,000 people that were working on that fire. And this was a fire that we were in unified command with CAL FIRE on. The Ward fire, much smaller, human-caused, although not suspected to be arson. It threatened private timberlands, residences, power lines, railroads, etc., and that was active for about 4 days. That was about 550 acres, all of them on private lands, and we ended up with not quite 600 people on those fires. Overall, I wanted to give you a little bit of context. The Shasta Trinity has, looking back at 40 years, on average, we would have about 260 fires a year, and we would burn not quite 22,000 acres. Average, as you know, no year is generally average. You have real high years and you have real low years. So in 2008, which certainly is memorable to all of us in the area, we had not quite 250 fires, but we burned almost 200,000 acres. And then if you compare that to this year, in 2008, you'll recall, all of our fires seemed to happen all at once with that lightning shower that came through. In 2012, so far, we have had 92 fires, and we've burned not quite 51,000 acres. I wanted to recognize, I think many of us know this, but we fight fires with lots of partnerships, lots of people who are in the suppression business and lots of law enforcement partners. These are most of the partners that we work with, and on the Bagley, we were working very closely with Sierra Pacific Industries and Hearst because their lands were immediately threatened. In the Bagley fire, pretty much all of that land is checkerboard, so SPI owns every other section of that. This gives you a sense of the fuels. We have particularly dry fuels this year. So if you look at the green line going down on the bottom, that's the minimum that we've recorded. In other words, the fuels were not as dry. That's the least dry that we've recorded over our summer months. And then if you look at the red, that's this year, and you can see as we get into the 1st of August, the red touches that purple line up there, which is the maximum that we've ever recorded. So we have some historically dry fuels this year. Wanted to give you a sense, again, I'm focusing on the Bagley because of the size of it, but if you look at the perimeter, you see it in red, and when we say we have 100% containment, we have a fire line around that entire perimeter. Only the red that you're looking at is what we call really burned hot, really high severity. This fire was primarily fuels driven, and much of that very hot was when we had some torching of trees. And then the yellow is what we would call moderate mortality, moderately hot, and then the green represents, which is the huge majority of it, I believe it ends up being about 70% is the best data I have right now. That means it was a very low, mostly underburn burn. As I mentioned at the last meeting, our next step is to do assessments. We are about to complete our burned area emergency rehab. So we have people out there looking at the soils and looking at the whole watershed, and they're just about completing that. And then we will go into what we call a rapid assessment, and we will view all of the issues that exist in the very large watershed, and we'll do that very quickly to give us kind of a snapshot. Yes?
Real quick question. Each one of those squares then is 640 acres a section?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's what I thought.
Yes. This is just an example of some of the burns that we have picture of. We had a number of community meetings. At the last update I gave you, I mentioned our focus on a website called InsaWeb, which is sort of short for Incident Website. We obviously also have people knocking on doors, particularly when homes are threatened. We had a number of community meetings, and we held them in Lakehead, Big Bend, and McLeod. And I would comment to you that these were the most positive public meetings during a fire I have ever experienced. People were informed in their questions. They were very interested in what was going on, and there was a sincere interest to understand what was being done about the fire, etc. So I felt we had excellent attendance and an excellent dialogue with those community meetings. I think I skipped one. I don't know how to go back. So, anyway, my final slide is simply to thank all of the firefighters. We had, as I say, thousands of them come. We had lots of cooperation from everybody, and it was just a very good working relationship. We certainly learn every year things we can do better. One of the things I think that we will focus on, in addition to sort of the fire tactics themselves, is evacuation information and how we can do that better and work better with the various sheriff's departments in the various counties. I believe you all had also asked about impacts on recreation in the area. And at this time, I do not have a lot. We made some phone calls, and the following information is basically what I have. Of the negative impacts, most of those might be on day use. So local people wanting to go out and fish on the lake, etc., they could see the smoke, they could see it was socked in, and they decided not to go. I don't really have hard numbers, but the different concessionaires indicated what they saw was a little bit of impacts on the day use. They really did not see cancellations because most of the reservations are made well in advance. They also said they felt that people understood that the smoke was temporary. They are not seeing any impacts on next year's reservations, which of course they are starting to get. And come the end of the year, we will have a sense of their financial situation, but none of them expressed a real serious hit from the smoke. We certainly had very heavy smoke on Shasta Lake, but it was not day in and day out. I mean, we had a number of days that it was socked in, but then we had days that the smoke lifted. And I would be happy to answer any questions. I do have my Forest Management Officer, Arlen Cravens, with me, and at the appropriate time, I'll ask if he has anything to add, or if you have a really tough question, I'll ask him to take it.
Supervisor Haas?
What about timber harvest after the fire? Now, every other section is SPs up there, so they will probably be in there harvesting theirs, and I just wondered how we were going to do on the government side if we were looking at an exclusion, or so we can do some of this and not waste it, or are we gaining any ground on in those areas?
You know, Supervisor Hawes, at the last meeting, you mentioned the exclusion of a possibility. I still am not seeing anything about that. It is true that we're working with Sierra Pacific Industries. They do plan actually to start some harvest this week. I think you're fully aware that they have a very different process under the state, and in this an emergency, I believe they have a wait period after they file some papers of like 5 days. So they are, in fact, about to operate if they're not already operating today. So we're working with them on the roads that they use and so forth. We have not yet determined what we will do in the way of any salvage. You saw the hot areas. They would be the prime areas for that. We certainly will be looking at hazard trees along roads, etc. That area had not seen any fire for, my understanding is, since the early 1900s, but we will assess that in this rapid assessment that we're going to do.
Now, how close did this get? We had a tour up there a number of years ago where you'd done some thinning and some beautiful work on the ground that would, keep it down on the ground and let it run that way. Did this fire get into any of that area?
No, sir, it did not. I think the trip that you might be talking about might be up closer towards the Iron Canyon Reservoir. No, it didn't. Yeah, that really is. Yeah, that really is nice.
Supervisor Kehoe?
Thank you, Vice Chairman Hartman. Excellent presentation this morning, Ms. Haywood. Thank you. I'd like to focus briefly on a statement you made about SPI going in there and starting some salvage activity. For the benefit of the audience and also the board, would you characterize the differences between what the private sector can do as far as salvage and what your organization is faced with? People don't understand, or they don't know, perhaps, why one entity can go in there and get to work right away and your organization has to wait a period of time.
Yes, I will do my best. I would say simply, it's a little bit like night and day, is a comparison. As I alluded to, they have what I think is a 5-day waiting period once they file some paperwork. They do not really have a public process. So, for example, after we do our assessment, we may decide that there are some projects that could come out of this, in which case we will comply with one of many laws, but one of them is the National Environmental Policy Act, which is primarily an act of disclosure and informing the public. We obviously also comply with the Endangered Species Act, et cetera. So that means that we go through an analysis and an assessment of the area that we would be looking at for a project. And one of the components of that assessment is to look at the watershed and what we call the cumulative effects. And we are often in these fire situations caught in the following dilemma. The private entities, in this case every other section, have already gone in by the time we have moved through some of our process and started assessing the cumulative watershed effects. They have already harvested their sections, so that has an impact on the watershed as a whole. So by the time we are assessing that impact, it is significantly different from what it was, say, today. So then we have an appeal period. There are some exemptions. I would say that in the 2008 fires, we followed such a process, and it took us slightly less than a year to get through a sale that was called trough. But if you compare several weeks' worth of effort on the part, say, of a private entity, you really are looking at months, possibly 9 to 12 or longer months with the public lands.
Thank you. Two more questions, if you wouldn't mind. Could you talk to us about, and let's use Bagley as an example, could you talk to us about the suppression costs associated with that fire and also the anticipated rehab costs associated with that fire?
I can. At the moment, we have spent slightly more than $35 million on Bagley. Now, that's everything that we can count so far. And like a lot of complex operations, today at close of business, you may not necessarily know every nickel or dime that you have spent because some of those bills are still coming in. My estimate is in the neighborhood of $36 or $37 million that we will have spent for suppression. I will really have to give you a range for estimating the restoration costs because I haven't seen any of those figures, and of course it hasn't happened yet. But I would estimate somewhere between $500,000 and then several million. And I could be off there, but that's about what I would estimate. One of the things about our system is in this burned area emergency rehab that we are talking about, I believe that the figure I'm giving you, $35.5 million, includes perhaps a little bit of that. But that is a separate code, and some weeks down the road, I could actually give you how much it cost those folks to basically assess the area. We have not yet done any of those things. We're in the process now of water barring roads and dozer lines and pushing back berms and that kind of thing. It's still too warm. The situation is too warm, if you will. We've just contained the fire for us to be pulling any materials back on dozer lines and that sort of thing for stabilization.
One final question. The media often reports to us that a given fire is contained. Could you characterize the difference between containment and controlled? Are there cost implications to those terms?
Yes, there's more work. So I will give my definition, and I will ask Arlen Cravens if he would like to give a better definition, let's say. My definition of containment is we have completed the fire line that we think will hold a fire around that entire perimeter. And that's the situation that we have now on Bagley. So we say it's 100% contained. When we say it's controlled, more time has elapsed, we have less heat within the area, and we believe there is little likelihood, very little likelihood, of the fire escaping out of that perimeter and moving on to something else. There is still a likelihood at containment because we simply have completed the lines around it. So if something started very hot on the interior, it's possible it could spot because we had spotting with this fire. But with control, more work has gone forward, and we feel much more comfortable that the fire will not escape those lines. Mr. Cravens, would you like to?
That was a perfect explanation.
That's high praise coming from Mr. Cravens because he's an expert. So that's That's the way I would put it, and a little more money is expended because a little more work is done.
Are there any cost implications involved in containment vis-à-vis control as far as salary suppression costs?
So we are having the fire team, we still have a Type 2 team on board. We're having them mop up to 300 feet within, so that is costing some dollars.
Supervisor Haas?
Well, it's too bad that we can't get to a point where we have that. Done. It seems like in the year 2012, by now, we would have figured that out somewhere. It would be nice to get it all done, replanted and grown back again like private companies do to get that kind of a job done. So, anyway, we'll just keep hoping and pushing for something like that down the road because it just seems to be such a waste.
I feel fairly comfortable that we will, where needed, be able to do some of the replanting where it's hot. But one of the things that I often say in these kinds of discussions is, because these are public lands, people here may understand or have different views on the system than, say, the folks in New York City. But the folks in New York City have a say over the land as well, and so it's a part of our...
Because they don't know what it looks like. A lot of them have never seen it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to give you an
We
update.
all appreciate the firefighters too, believe me. I mean, what a job, what a task they've had this summer.
Thank you.
Could you call attention to these, and we'll just leave them here.
Yes. Thanks. This gentleman who came up is Don Ferguson, and we had brought him on board early on. He actually, don't hold this against him, lives in Ashland, but he's great with fire information, and so he did this PowerPoint, which is why I had a better presentation than usual. So thank you, Don. And these cards have 2 websites on them. So I will give them to you, and we can make them available to the public. One is the InsaWeb website that I had mentioned before, but one is the Ready for Wildfire, which talks about some of the prevention techniques. And I had mentioned some prevention issues last time. We can all do a better job around our own homes and around areas that we have, because there's also a fair amount of literature that suggests that's one of the wisest things we can do to protect our homes. So going to these websites would be quite interesting for a lot of us. Thank you.
Supervisor Ball?
Thank you, Vice Chair. There we go. Now we have a microphone back on. I'm going to say, again, thank you for coming and presenting, and I've appreciated your thoughts as presented. I'm back on the subject from Supervisor Haas and from Supervisor Kehoe in terms of being able to salvage. You've explained the difference between public and private property and the regulations that you deal with, but is there not in existence any exemption or any path forward that would allow something besides those logs just lying there and rotting and dying? It seems like, regardless of whether it's private property or public property, wasting it seems like a waste. Is there nothing that exists in your policy that would allow an exemption and allow you to move forward more rapidly?
Well, with the trough project that we did in 2008, as I think I indicated, it took us not quite a year to get through that process. And at that time, I do not have the monetary values in my head at this moment, but that was a very viable timber sale. You know, there's always some deterioration in almost any kind of species that has been burned and is standing and we salvage. But that sale was still quite valuable, and we were able to harvest it. So a year may seem like a long time, and it is in some respects, but if in fact there are some areas that we could get to within a year, that won't be a total waste, if you will.
Oh, okay, so I didn't hear that clearly. I thought you were describing the lengthy process. That was the scaled-down process.
I am afraid so, yes.
My apologies. I would love to see this board weigh in, at least with Congressman Herger, if we have a consensus that we would love to have our federal representatives take a look at that and see if there isn't something that can be done to assist Ms. Haywood on a local level to speed that short process up into a perhaps making it even a more viable sale for you. And just one more question. I went online after the fire hit, and I took a look at some of the fire perimeters, the fire lines you had established. And I'm wondering, how do you set that process? Because some of the lines seem to be an extreme distance from the fire. And so in looking at it, I'm wondering, are we encouraging then what would in effect be called a controlled burn as opposed to putting out or suppressing the fire?
So your question is, how do we determine that?
Yes.
And we determine that with many different minds often. So some of those are almost predetermined with initial attack because it depends upon what the fire is doing at that time. So if we take Bagley, we had 17...
And is the Bagley fire I was looking at. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. So with Bagley, we had 17 jumpers in on those two fires within a very short period of time after the fire was discovered. They found that terrain to be extremely difficult to work in. It's steep, it's rugged, and we, of course, always have as our first and highest priority the safety of firefighters and the public. So that fire, we were simply not able to catch, if you will, on initial attack. This year, we've caught something like 92% of all of the fires that we have had so far, which is below our average because we normally catch about 98% of them. But this year, with the fuels being what they are, these fires are growing much more quickly than we have seen. So to get back to now the lines in general, as time goes by and the fire is doing different things, if you will, whether it's spotting or whether it's running up a steep ridge, etc., we will not put our firefighters in danger knowingly. We will not put them into any risk that we cannot mitigate. So we may well go on parts of this fire, as we did with Bagley. We went indirect. We found the right ridge, if you will, on which we felt we could really hold that fire. And in other cases, we went direct. So in Unified Command with CAL FIRE, we had a long contingency line. I don't really have in my head the number of miles, but it seems like it's probably 9 or so, across the north on private lands to protect that Hearst property, which was just to the north of that. So we were putting in contingency lines, often not only one contingency line, but sometimes 2 contingency lines, because at the moment, you don't really know what tomorrow might be, or next week, if you will. So you're building a plan A, B, and C, generally. But we do go direct where we believe we safely can. In some of our California country, we just cannot do that safely. Now, in Redding, it's flat, and we've got sidewalks and homes and vegetation and grass and fields, and we can go direct on that kind of thing, but most of that is not in our what we call direct protection area. Did I answer your question?
Fairly well. I guess my concern was, and I see the element of need for safety for the firefighters. I actually also looked and asked for a copy of the plans and the fire lines, and just some of them seem to not be on the first ridge or the second ridge, but actually, if I was measuring right on the maps I was looking at, even 3 miles from the fire, which seemed like an extremely long distance from the fire. And that was what brought the question up. It was a question of, well, could have it been scooted in a mile and still accomplish the same task?
Yeah, again, I will ask Garland if he wants to add something, but I would tell you that one of the things that I think we don't maybe communicate too well about some of our burnouts is when the decision is made to burn out an area, you're generally making that decision because you believe you can create a blackened area with little or nothing left there on your own terms, in your own conditions. You can burn it out, say, late at night when the humidities, or early in the morning when the humidities are higher. You will have cooler temperatures. So sometimes I think maybe we don't do a good job of doing that. We might decide that this is a safer approach to do some burnout on this ridge or this line. So if in fact that fire, which is now 2 miles or 3 miles or whatever away, because 3 miles is not actually a distance, a great distance in some fire behaviors. In a slow-moving fire, in my mind, 3 miles is a long way away. In a fast-moving fire, it's not, it's not very far away.
Sure.
Arlen, would you want to add something to that?
Thank you, Ms. Haywood.
Yes.
Supervisor Kehoe?
Ms. Haywood, I have a follow-up question to Supervisor Boss' question. In your display, you've indicated that there are 46,011 acres burned. And so, attempting to be as specific as you can, how many of those acres consumed can be attributed to indirect fire suppression activities, and how many are directed at direct line? Am I explaining my question? In other words, Mr. Baugh has said that in some cases he believes you backed off as much as 3 miles to burn out a section. Well, in the aggregate of 46,000 acres, how much can be attributed to these burning out activities? And perhaps Mr. Cravens could answer that question.
He may actually, he may actually have that number. We actually ask the teams, the IC, incident commander of those teams, to track those acres. And I have not yet seen them because so we asked them to track the retardant drops. Where was retardant dropped and how much was dropped? We asked them to track burn-out acres, and we will have that figure. So I'm not going to guess in case Arlen has seen that figure. Have you seen that figure? No. So then I will guess. Since he hasn't seen the figure, I would suspect we did not burn a lot more than something between 2,000 and 5,000 acres because there wasn't all that much burnout, and it was along lines, and it wasn't particularly deep. But when I get that figure, I'll make sure that we have that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor Hawes has another question.
Well, just a couple of comments. A lot of people don't realize that fire makes its own wind, and it runs uphill like crazy, doesn't it? And that's all uphill country, all the way back up through there. But also, if you were looking for a place to backfire, whatever you want to call it, you're going to find a place like we went and looked at that time where you've done some prep work, and you can burn a lot of acres without doing any damage and get way. I don't think 2 or 3 miles is bad all the time because you want to stop that top jumping from tree to tree. And if you get all of that stuff burnt underneath, there's nothing to carry that lower fire, which tends to ladder up. So I think that's kind of the way you guys do that, really. I mean, you look for the best places where you can make that line and control it, because you don't want it running over the top of you, and that's what it can do.
Absolutely, and as I say, during the night or early morning, you've got higher humidities, you've got lower temperatures, and so you have the fire more on your terms than you're going to have it at 12 or 2 o'clock. And I would add one more piece of information. On the west side, with our Stafford fire, this fire moved through one of our fuel management zones. One of the things that we will do, I don't have the data yet, we will monitor that. We will have people go out and assess what that fuel management zone looked like, what condition we believe we pretty much know it was in because the whole fuel management zone wasn't burned through. And then we will assess the fire that went through there, the conditions of the day, etc. And so that gives us data about the effectiveness of our fuel management zones. But it did not look like the one that you saw at Ironside, I'm reasonably sure. That was a beautiful piece of work, for sure.
No other questions? Thank you, Ms. Haywood.
Thank you.
And gentlemen, for being here today.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we'll move on to consent calendar. I have a request for public comment on item C3. Are there any other items to pull?
Move approval on the remainder.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of the consent calendar?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item C3, County Clerk Registrar of Voters.
Good morning, Vice Chair, members of the board, Kathy Darling Allen, Shasta County Clerk and Registrar of Voters. This is our semi-annual report we bring after each one of our special district and school districts, or prior to, I should say, our special district and school district elections. You haven't seen one of these in 3 years because if you'll recall, in 2011, we had no election. So we haven't seen this item at the board since 2009 when candidates file for office. If there's not a sufficient number of candidates to force an election, then those candidates are, by law, brought before you to appoint to serve as if elected.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We have a one speaker request from Dolores Lucero.
I had a question on regarding that on item 3, C3. I know the request, basically, there's nobody else running, but I know there's a time limit where there could be somebody who wants to do a write-in. So therefore, you need to leave that open for somebody who wants to apply as a write-in, because I think there's a deadline. I think it's October, I don't recall, but there's a deadline. So if you appoint somebody, you're closing that opportunity for somebody else to sign up as a write-in. Okay, thank you.
Starling, do you want to address that?
Thanks. The write-in period does go quite late in the election calendar until 14 days prior to the election, which is October 23rd. In those cases where jurisdictions do not have enough candidates to force an election, there is an opportunity for any voter to submit a petition to that district asking for that contest to appear on the ballot. That deadline has passed, and so these offices are now closed.
Thank you very much.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Go back to regular calendar. Item R2, Administrative Office Board of Supervisors, receive legislative update and supervisors' reports. Mr. Lees? Supervisor Kehoe?
Thank you. Mr. Lees and I attended the water symposium that was conducted and presented out at the McConnell Foundation. They provided the location. It was excellent, gave us good background information. We heard from 3 speakers, and it was well worth our time to attend. We also attended the groundbreaking for the new hotel down at Wind River Casino. That will generate an infusion of jobs for our community, and it was very well attended. And then finally,
No, yeah.
Okay.
minor concern, and it was this, that consultant, and they put together a team to evaluate the 5 proposals. Now, regrettably, from no one from the county was invited to participate in that review process, nor was anyone from Anderson or Shasta Lake invited to participate. So we're engaged in a partnership in RABA, and it seems to me to be efficacious if these other jurisdictions were invited to participate, and they will correct that in the future. So I just call that to your attention. That concludes my report.
Supervisor Baugh?
Along with Supervisor Hawes, we spent 2 days with the Resource Advisory Council reviewing options for use of Secure Rural Schools Act's monies. And fighting the fights. And it's always an interesting process to see everyone's perspective on how we can take advantage of those funds on Forest Service properties. So we'll see that at the board. Also, I believe along with the rest of the board, most of the board members, the City of Anderson had its annual State of the City address. It was very positive and uplifting. I appreciate a full house there, and the City of Anderson seems to progress in a very conservative and well thought out process. Congratulations to the city.
Supervisor Hawes?
Yes, I see that the new roundabout is well under construction down there at Deschutes. And
They're working hard.
I-5, and I have had the opportunity to go through the ones on Shasta View, and I think they work pretty well. It's just once in a while people hesitate a little because they're not used to it, but once they get it worked out in their mind, it really works quite well. So I think they're a good thing, and I'm looking forward to that one being done down there, and it'll really be nice. So and I really have nothing else to report. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll pass today. Board has nothing further. We will adjourn. Thank you all for being here today.